I wanted to tell you about this new documentary. It's called In Search of Bengali Harlem, and it's really uncovering a bit of a forgotten story of Bengali sailors back in 1930s New York. And it talks about how they built lives and families in this neighborhood of New York called Harlem, and how they mixed with other communities. They opened businesses and they really built something there. And it's a history that I think not a lot of us maybe know about and have learnt about how we really contributed to some of these places. So this story is about identity, belonging, everything that's happening beyond the headlines. And I think it can help us understand ourselves a little bit more better today. And it's coming to the UK this week. So earlier I spoke to Alaudin and Vivek about it. What I really want to know to start is, what drew you to this forgotten chapter of history? Because Alaudin, this is quite personal for you. Why did you want to find out who your parents were before they were your mum and dad?
Well, the quick version is in the late 90s, when my career was kind of thriving as a comedian in America, that I was talking about being Muslim. And I repeat, I was the only, before Hassan Minhaj, before Mindy Kaling, I was the only South Asian actually that got on national TV. So I was, making jokes about growing up Muslim in Spanish Harlem and dealing with the world from my perspective. And I used to make the joke that America may have welcomed South Asians, but they didn't welcome the Bangladeshis. So when I made that leap into the next level, which was film and TV, I only got offered roles that were very stereotypical, and they didn't have any nuance. I felt America by itself didn't understand the lost history of how South Asians came to America, and primarily that Bangladesh migration to London and then New York. So I felt there needed to be a film about this. And so I confronted Vivek, because I saw his film Mutiny South Asians, in South Asian musicians in London. And I love the way he focused, without beating you over the head, about what the South Asians experienced in London. It was such a really good documentary that I asked Vivek, could he help me tell this story, but sort of frame it in the struggles and the obstacles that, my parents went through, and that first wave of South Asians.
So Vivek, you are a filmmaker, but you have also spent years digging into these stories about who we are, the stories of our ancestors, of our families that have often been forgotten. When you first heard Alaudin's family story, what struck you the most about it, where you thought, yeah, I want to make a story out of this?
So when Alaudin came to me with this story, and he told me what he knew about his father, that his father had come to the United States in the 1920s, that he had married a Puerto Rican woman, moved to Spanish Harlem. That story was just so different anything I had heard. Since there was no other history that was written that could explain Alaudin's father and his circle, I made the decision to essentially become a historian.
Why do you think these stories and this period of history disappeared for so long, or it's never really been told?
I think in America, we have a unique history here in that, because it's essentially a colonial settler environment that has been passed on through the centuries. The conqueror basically tells the history. So it's a very Eurocentric history. And I feel that has a lot to do with how a group of people sees themselves. I didn't see myself anywhere on TV or film. And, sometimes as a comedian, I would, go on these talk shows, and as a comedian, they would prep you and say, we don't want you to talk about being Muslim. We don't want you to talk about what that childhood is like. We want broad stuff. And I was like, that's my whole act. And it's ironic that, 25, 30 years ago when I got out of high school, that was not encouraged. And here we are celebrating, a Muslim mayor in England, and a Muslim mayor that just got elected here in New York. That now the way you can deal with that hate, with that discrimination, that xenophobia, is to have an understanding that that kind of racism is taught. And the reason that it's taught is there isn't any counter images that contrast that. So if all you see is one image of a group of people, then people drink that Kool-Aid. So when they only see us as terrorists or as, negative stereotypes, It's up to us to control the narrative. And I already knew that that narrative was false because I grew up hearing these stories about my uncles, my chachas, talking about leaving, Sylhet, Nor Kalidaka, and what it was like. And, I was a little kid, and they would say, do you know what it was like? And do you know why it's called Bangladesh? And I literally have a basketball in my hand and say, are y'all done? I got to go play some basketball. I knew of these stories, but I didn't let it marinate in my soul. And what I think Vivek and I tried to do is take the audience with us on this journey so that they can learn that, A, that Muslims are human, but that the journey that our parents went through was so beautiful that the obstacles that they experienced was very similar to what we're going through. And here I was as a comedian in Hollywood, never having any sort of solidarity with my parents, thinking, oh, well, they're fobs. They're fresh off the boat. I listen to hip hop. They don't understand my plight, realizing that they already experienced that 50, 60 years before I was even thought of. So I think if we understand their history, we have, I think, a larger sense of self. And they came here with nothing and built communities. And that is a magical story that needs to be told, and how they found solidarity with African Americans and people of color.
I have to ask you, you are both New Yorkers. Today is a huge day. We have just seen Zohran Mamdani elected in New York City, a South Asian man, a Muslim man, one of the youngest mayors that the city's ever seen. What does this moment represent to you?
I don't think even 2 years ago we could have imagined this. After years and years of being in the shadows, but being an integral part of New York City, now South Asian Muslims and South Asians more broadly are the face of the city.
Oh, I really enjoyed that chat with Alaudin and Vivek. And I think even though Alaudin's gone on this really personal journey, he's looked at his dad over in New York, I think we can all understand a bit more about our own stories as South Asians in the West. I think, things didn't just start in the 70s. Communities were already out there. They were mixing with their neighbours. They were opening up businesses. And, at this time in the world where there's so much noise around immigration, belonging, I think this documentary really speaks to everything that's going on back then, but now as well. It's really beautiful. It's called In Search of Bengali Harlem. It lands in the UK this week. If you're curious about where we come from, how deep our roots really go, it's really, really worth a watch.